Welcome to The Struggle is Real, a show for 20-somethings that are trying to figure out adulting. I'm your host, Justin Peters. Each episode, we focus on solving a problem that we will face throughout this defining decade that wasn't covered in the classroom. This could include topics about our career, health, relationships, and money. Let's get into it. My childhood was filled with this constant need for play. I remember playing a lot of backyard sports and fictional quest games that we just made up on the fly. I always had a sense of adventure. As I got older, though, I found myself losing touch with that. I'm all about high achievement activities, but I also wanted to allow myself to do things just for the simple fact that they put a smile on my face. I found getting back to the baseline of play and adventure way more challenging than I thought it would be. Speaking with friends, I've learned that having fun as an adult is difficult for many of us. I thought this would make for an interesting topic on The Struggle is Real, and I invited my friend Tyson Bankert to join me in this conversation. Tyson knows a whole lot about fun. He spent many years working at an after-school program where he was responsible for creating opportunities for kids to have fun. Tyson decided to use that skill set for adults and started the company Recess Calgary, where he creates an environment for grown-ups to take a break from adulting. I'm hoping that this conversation sparks the desire to build more play into your life. Tyson also shares timely advice on how to be a better facilitator, being attuned to inclusion, and creating a personal slogan that you can live by. I hope you enjoy my conversation with the whimsical and adventurous man they call Coach T, Tyson Bankert. We're covering a great topic today that I've actually been dancing around in my head quite a bit, and that's the sense of play. And so many 20-somethings start to lose their identity around play. And I love that you created this organization called Recess Calgary, and you use the word recess because that brings me back to a very specific time and moment in my life. So let's start there. Let's start with a fun and whimsical question. What kind of recess kid were you? Did you run straight to the sports fields, hit the playground, join Foursquare?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have always considered myself a troublemaker. And so the idea of just whether I was definitely the kid who organized people to come together, and usually it was grounders or something to that effect. And that's kind of where I feel like I was within in the social hierarchy, I guess, of recess. Was definitely someone who was trying to lead games and play. And also I always found myself the kind of kid who wanted to include people as well. And I always remember being having the kids who were considered not cool to be around, always wanting me to be partner with them, and me being sure, I'll do it. And I was I wanted to do that, but also I was always but I want to hang out with my friend or whatever. But I was always sort of that the access point, I think, to those kids.
Did you say grounders? What is that?
Grounders, yeah. Maybe it's a Canadian thing. I'm not sure, but basically it's a game. So you definitely probably have heard of it. Maybe it's called something else. But grounders is basically you're on a play on a jungle gym or what have you. And if you touch the ground, usually there's gravel on the ground. So if you hear that, you can say grounders. And sorry, if you're the tager, your eyes are closed and you're trying to catch people. If you hear someone on the ground, then you call grounders. If they're on the ground, then they're now in.
Oh, interesting.
So you run around the playground with your eyes closed, which obviously is not very smart, but it's totally important. And to the game. And if you hear someone, then you call grounders. Maybe people might call it lava. I'm not sure.
The floor is lava.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's a combination of that plus there's a pool game called Fish Out of Water. And it seems like the rules are very similar to that, where you can get out of the pool and run and jump into the other side of the pool. But if they call fish out of water while you're out of the pool, then you're now it.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it sounds like you couldn't get enough of organizing recess, and you decided to continue doing that in a part-time, full-time job as an after-school programmer with kids. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience and the time period that you ended up doing that?
Yeah. So, I mean, even from even earlier than that, when I was 9, 10, I would go to camp and stuff like that. And so I always saw people older than me, by older, they're 13, 14, but they're leading these wide field games and all that kind of stuff. So I always really loved that, especially when I, as a camper. So anyway, that definitely was an interesting model for me. But specifically the paid position, I started maybe I was 16, 17. And then I worked there for like, that was maybe 23, 24. Um, uh, and that was like a part-time gig. And so I ran a couple of programs for the municipality, running games and stuff like that for after school, basically, program. And then also during the summer times, I would be a day camp leader or an overtime every summer. My position would be more with more responsibility. But yeah, that's kind of where it started, and I've always sort of enjoyed that dynamic of leading, but then also like just like having fun with kids and just like being really playful and like I don't know. I was always kind of like the cool leader in the sense of like I was always like let's not make this so super structured and just have as much fun as possible. And I know I'm like kind of like it's a little like I'm the cool leader, but I definitely was. I still run into like people now who I guess at that time were like now 20s who are like, hey, I can remember you, and like blah blah blah. And they're like, they remember me, which I always find
That's
is
cool.
really interesting, and which is it's a demonstration of like that kind of impact is always like you never really see it in the moment, and then it's like long like you get that return much later on for sure.
At a much smaller scale, I did fourth grade camp, which was like 4 or 5 days. And it was a really unbelievable experience. And I did it similar to you as well. I was a fourth grade camper and I saw the high schoolers that volunteered to come and be the counselors or mentors or chaperone,
Mm-hmm.
whatever their title was. And I was like, I want to do that. Like whenever I am capable of doing that, I will totally do it. And
Totally.
then I got the
Yeah.
opportunity my junior year of high school to go and do it. And luckily I did because it's the very last year that they brought on high school mentors to do that. And it was such a blast going
Mm-hmm.
back to that experience and getting to be on the flip side. And then,
Mm-hmm.
it was just, yeah, it was such a blast. And I'm like looking back and now remembering some of that, it brought up some really great feelings and emotional feelings. But for you, you spent somewhere between 6 and 8 years in this role. And it seemed like that was pretty emotional leaving it. I saw a Instagram post that you posted about leaving that opportunity. Was that a tough, I mean, maybe not a tough decision for you to leave and to kind of move on and start, I don't know, your career, but it seemed like it was tough to leave that chapter behind.
I don't know if I necessarily no, not really, because it was sort of the end of like university days too. And so there was sort of like this like sense of like wanting to transition to a lot of things. So at that time I had like 3 jobs. I was moving to somewhere like moving to a different neighborhood. And I think I'd also was about to go to Spain or somewhere for a while. And so it was just like a very like organic, natural like time to like transition. And I felt like, yeah, like quitting here and quitting there and moving, shifting makes sense. And so I think in that regard, it wasn't too sad. And also I lived like at that point in my life, I lived like 40 minutes away
Ugh.
from where working. So I was like, why am I doing this every like once a week to like keep the gym membership and to do that for the week. So and it was really cool too, because like in the same breath that you saw, like there were now at that time, there were kids who've been at that age where they're like, oh, I want to come back as like a volunteer and then as a junior leader and then as like a what have you. And so I think it was really a natural fit for other people to take that space. And that's exactly what happened. So that was kind of like pretty cool.
Interesting. So then you go on and create this awesome organization called Recess Calgary. Can you explain a little bit if somebody approached you at a party and you started telling them or explaining them about Recess Calgary, how do you explain it or say what it is?
Yeah, so Recess Calgary is an opportunity for adults to play like the way they used to. So that looks like um, playing tag, playing grounders, maybe, playing capture the flag, and really having fun and being silly. And so I'm the facilitator, our coach T, and I sort of help guide folks in that process of play. You can imagine Duck Duck Goose, or I make up my own games from that I played back in the day, but also new games I've just kind of thought of based on kind of who I know is coming, and just try and really mix it up every once in a while. Like I've done like riddle nights. I've done, we just coloring as sort of an opening activity. So really finding things that were reminiscent of childhood and being in a space where you can participate and
Hmm.
play. So
What was the impetus behind that? Why did you decide to focus in that aspect?
Well, I mean, two things. One was I've always thought that would be a really fun, creative thing to be part of. And there wasn't anything like that, particularly here in where I live. And so I thought, well, and then also like the scaling piece of like just starting it made really easy sense. Like I was like, okay, there's like probably a few things I need to buy in terms of equipment, renting gym rentals, not that hard, and like find insurance. Like it was easy enough to like I could see where all the dots sort of fit. So like in that regard, it was like, oh, this is a really easy business to start off. And then also just like, yeah, like I really want to, I, I do a lot of facilitation in other areas around community development. And so that's where most of my contracts and skills are. And so I thought this would be a really great opportunity for me to do my own thing without sort of like maybe different expectations, or I can kind of have free reign to kind of do what I want, and also sort of like be the kid back in the day, just like bringing people together and having fun.
How has the reception been so far? Are people excited? Do you see a lot of new people joining or people coming back that are frequent guests?
Yeah, so and with the pandemic, it's been 2 years where it's been like rough to sort of
Man,
start.
I'm sorry that
But
you got to deal with that.
yeah, so part of that was just like I think I just need to maybe take a little bit of a pause. And so now, like as I said, like on the last couple of days where I live, has there been any real like opportunity to kind of think, okay, like long term, this maybe might be able to start up again. And even then, I'm still kind of like crossing my fingers. So we'll see kind of as we get closer to the summertime. Uh, but yeah, like initially, it was more like just inviting all the people I knew and be like, hey, like this is like the premiere night, like come on out, like blah blah blah. We're starting, and that was really good. You know, people were really receptive to my idea, and like when I tell people about Recess, like, oh wow, that's so much fun, and they have like their own ideas about what it might look like. And like, yeah, you should come on out on Friday night or Saturday morning or what have you when we play. And so everyone's really loves the idea, and I know how to do a good press release. And so when I first initially launched it, a lot of people did get attention from media about it, and which was kind of quite exciting because I was like, oh sweet, like people are interested, what have you. Like people heard it on the radio, and I was on the news and stuff like that. People just are looking for something to like that's fun, right? And like seeking something new and nostalgic. And so that was sort of so yeah, there was a lot of good energy around that. And yeah, people came out every week. Usually had about 10 to 12 people. And over the course of the time, there was definitely in the neighborhood that I host Recess in, it's definitely like a younger crowd. It's like the place to be in the city. And so there was definitely a group of people who lived nearby that became sort of ongoing participants. And then there was, always extras that kind of popped in. Sometimes I would get my friends who were like, hey, like I'm interested to come or whatever. I'm like, come out. Like you keep saying you're gonna come. So like just do it, right? And that was always but there had been times where like I was like, oh, maybe only 3 people are gonna show up to this week. Like, ugh. But also though those nights were also really, really great too. And so yeah, so it's it was kind of a little bit of a roller coaster. And then also just with my other jobs too, like with my other work that I was doing, it always felt like pretty easy to like I was always facilitating, and people were always talking about, hey, like Tyson, what are you doing, or questions or whatever. And so I had a lot of opportunity where it felt natural to like invite people to Recess or talk about Recess without it being like, hey, this is like here's my business card. It was just sort of just organic. So it was helpful in that way. And definitely it's all about kind of who you know, and that invite, right? Like helping people see themselves sort of in that space without ever really knowing like what is Duck Duck Goose. Like that's not like, like no one's coming to Duck Duck Goose, they're coming to like this open, it's like they're I honor the fact that people are coming into this space not really knowing what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't even really describe what we're doing each week, because that doesn't make any like for you asked me what Grounders is, and I was like, if I were to play like no one would know. So it's just like come in, be open, and being super willing to play and have fun is kind of like the real hook for folks, which can be hard too, right? If you're not really used to it. So that's sort of that feel like, I love this idea, but like, do I really want to go out of my way to like go and do that? So part of that has been trying to start doing social media stuff, videos, and all these things, which takes a little bit more money, a little bit more time. I'm not definitely not my forte in terms of like wanting to like spam people per se. But that's definitely where some of that traction has come through. And then to kind of keep going on with that question, I got the attention of a couple of bigger names, bigger, like, I don't know if you like Sports Check, for example, which is like a big sports brand here in Canada. If you're, Canadian Tire, there's like an FGL. Anyway, they run a bunch of things. So they asked me to do a couple of events here in Calgary and in Toronto, which is a lot bigger and which is like fun. I was like, yeah, sure, please, pay me a bunch of money. I'll show up, play Recess there. You guys can use my face or whatever for your stuff. And so that was good, because then other people, when I come back home, being like, hey, like, they were like, we want to promote like your events through like the Sports Check brand. So like, how do we what does that look like? And so there was some more attention there. And then throughout, a few things here and there, but for the most part, it's been really good to invite folks and just like that one-on-one.
Let's double back to an idea that you were starting to lean into, and that's this like ambivalence that some of the people that show up feel towards Recess. And you use two words actually in particular in the same sentence, which are a little bit of a dichotomy. You said new and novel, or new and nostalgic, which is interesting because the concept of Recess is nostalgic in the sense of we did it as a kid, but new as in the sense of I haven't done that in so long. It feels kind of brand new to me, which is so interesting. Was there ever a period in your life where you felt like you kind of lost that sense of play about yourself? And I'm imagining that so many people get reignited or find that spark again whenever they show up to a Recess event.
Mm-hmm. For me, not really necessarily, because I find that even with doing so I guess I've always been around children for the most part, maybe in the last maybe the last couple of years. And so I'm including the job that I had at the city where I was a day camp leader and led those things, I also did like respite care. And so we were just like, I just had like kids who I would drive and pick up, and we'd go and do fun events in around the city. And so I still once in a while will do that. That's always like, I don't know, it keeps me grounded to like the kids of the day, where I'm like I always think like it's so easy to just kind of forget. Like I know a lot of people in their 30s who maybe don't have their own children, don't have any children or kids in their life, that are just like, you're exposed to that kind of like dynamic. And so I've always had opportunities to like be playful and fun. And for my own like outlets, I think are always sort of just like very childlike.
Do you find that important to maintain that feeling?
Yeah, I really do. Because prior to starting Recess, if you had asked me if I was a creative person, I would have said no. And since starting this, I would say I'm definitely a creative person, in the sense that like I'm creating these ideas, or I'm like, when I think of like the things I do for wellness, it's a little bit more hands-on and tactile and just like relaxing, that I wouldn't have, that I think in some ways are like a creative outlet for me, even though I'm not like painting or doing like traditional forms of like creativity, which is also like putting creativity in a box anyway. So, but yeah. So that, I don't know. So I've never really felt that dynamic that you're speaking to, but I definitely think a lot of people that have come to Recess definitely do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think then I try and really capture that like familiarity piece. Like, you actually have done this before. You've just sort of lost that sense of whimsy and connection in this way to your body, and also to how you relate to people. And so I find for some folks that can be really difficult to get there. So for example, sometimes what I'll do is I'll have like a mole in the Recess where it's like, it's a friend of mine who are friends of mine who just sort of get it naturally. And I'll be like, hey, like I will kind of co-lead with them in that sense of like kind of create the space to help people feel easier to actually get to what I hope for is that real play and wellness.
You're so intentional about creating community and being thoughtful around that dynamics, kind of setting the intention right from the get-go. I know it seems like you're at least a fairly big reader as well, and two books around this topic of creating community that seem like have left a decent impact on you, both The Art of Gathering, which I picked up recently, actually. I'm on like
Awesome.
page 60 or 70 right now. So
Cool.
it's giving me a lot of great reminders around creating how I want to create different gatherings, everything from my professional life to my personal life, but also this book, Culture Code.
Yeah.
Another great one. I think there's like 3 pillars in there. I wrote them down: build safety, share vulnerability, and establish purpose. And it seemed like you were really intentional with Recess around each one of those. What did you learn or take away from Culture Code that you're now putting into your practice with Recess Calgary?
All of them, in the sense that like when we talk about like building safety, I think that's something that like specifically is really important to have people. Okay, so like one of the things that I think that makes people maybe feel not unsafe but uncertain about their participation is their ability to participate. So often like people will come to Recess thinking that it might be, so like I don't know, I like, this is like I'm fairly, I work out all the time. People are like, oh, like this guy, he's like a personal trainer guy, like, well, he's gonna like make us do these things. I'm like, no, like actually I'm really not. Like I actually want to, like I can do all those things if that's what we want to do, but that's not really what we're here for. And part of that I think is helping people feel safe to participate. And so oftentimes people might come to things, like I said, I want to honor the fact that people are coming to this thing, not coming in, not really knowing what to expect. And so part of that is like trying to create a culture where maybe in some ways like competition isn't super important to this. Like Recess is not necessarily about people. I mean, there is like, there's like sometimes a winner, but like it doesn't matter. And so for me, I really try to ensure like, hey, like that's been maybe a part of ways in which people might feel like, I guess, unsafe or uncertain about their participation, because like that matters in that particular space, versus this, it doesn't. Like the idea of me trying to push people, like, I've gone to spin class, I've gone to these, like, done CrossFit, all that stuff. It's like, go harder, go more. Blah.
Yeah.
And it's like, that actually, first of all, that doesn't motivate me, but also it doesn't, that's not kind of the space I want to create. I'm not going to like play harder, like be more fun, like laugh more. Like it doesn't just come into space and be yourself. And how do I help you do that? And so part of that is like building on those connections as well. Like making sure like I say hello to everybody, and like the last person that I say hello to, I introduce that to the new person that I don't know, or maybe I do know.
So smart.
And just trying to like create that like cohesion. And then one thing I learned throughout the process is like, like people need to like stretch. Like I, as someone who like does that daily and that kind of like, some people come into space being like, I don't know, like I've never done this before. And so I had to like kind of taper that back.
No doubt. What about the vulnerability piece? Maybe that kind of goes hand in hand with the safety aspect. Like you are creating this community or this safe space to that will hopefully eventually, I guess, lead into vulnerability. It seems like they kind of come in timid whenever they're first starting your events, and then they like walk out like arms over each other, like ready to go, like hang out afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like vulnerability is really important to me. And then and so I always tell people like it's not the grades. Like I'm not grading anybody. And so the real value in the play is the wellness piece of taking a break. Like, this is your opportunity to just take a break from life and being an adult. And like adulting is hard. And that for me, I think in that vulnerability space of, if you need to take a break because you're like, oh wow, this actually is tiring me, or I just want to watch what's going on, do that. No one's judging you. There's no, and I mean, I get that there's people who, will say, oh, like this is no judgment free zone. And yet then there's this expectation though, to get somewhere in that, like the only thing that I'm asking people to do is if they want to participate. Like you can watch, you can do whatever, like there's no other expectation. And so, I think I can, and as a facilitator, I can manage the space enough, like to ensure that everything we do is still going to be fun. Like, even if it's like me deciding, I'm going to be the taker for the next 10 minutes, I can physically just do that. If no one else wants to do it, that's fine. And so knowing like that people can just like opt in or opt out is really important. And that's part of what being an adult is that you can just opt in. Like now, like Recess is like an option versus something where you were like forced to do, because there were probably kids who didn't want to do Recess at all growing up. And that sense of vulnerability there, or creating that you can just do that is important. And I think one other thing about vulnerability that I do find that there is certain people who come who are just kind of like get it. Like they're kind of quirky. They're a little just like they're a little different. They're my kind of folks, but they appreciate what I'm trying to put out there.
Yeah.
And so they can be silly and goofy, and it's always kind of fun to see people respond to how goofy and silly how they're participating. Like I just recall this one girl, she would like anytime she was having fun, she'd like snort, and it was just like hilarious to me. But like part of it, she was kind of like embarrassed at first, but I was like, no, like whatever. Like I typically don't do that. Whatever. I don't know what's gonna. Like, but if that's a sign that you're having fun and which you are, like lean into that. Like it's totally fine. And we're not. And like the goal is this is something that's just like it's like a quirky thing that you're doing. It's not for that quirky. Like there are people who do all the time, but like that is just it's totally fine. It's that kind of space to just be yourself.
So many people. Well, there's kind of two camps, I think. There's like the gym class hero camp that
Totally.
their favorite subject was recess, quickly followed behind PE, and that are probably in the competitive rec leagues and doing a bunch of
For
things.
sure.
And then I feel like there is a large subset of people that also felt like outcasts when it came to recess, and they never really found their groove. And I love that.
Yeah.
I feel like you are thinking about inclusion and incorporating them, and even something as simple as it's not, maybe you're not leaning into competitive games as much as you are leaning into collaborative games. And
Totally.
I think that's really fascinating. Or you routinely volunteer yourself first if there is a particularly vulnerable role within side of the games that you're hosting. I love that aspect to recess, and I'm assuming that is very, very intentional in your mind.
Yeah, like I mean, for me, it's all about like that cooperation and how do I help support that. So like the gym class heroes, like I am a gym class hero.
Yeah.
I know like I am, and but I also know that like for example, if like and it depends on the group. Like back in November, I had a group of people who came who all were friends. They were all they all played on sports teams together, what have you. And so yeah, we definitely had a lot more. There was definitely a bit more of an emphasis of like I could feel that happening. And so it was like, okay, like let's go here. Like everyone's comfortable with that level of like games that are a bit more like, we played a game where like pins, not pins, clothespins were attached to people. So like part of that is a little bit more rough. You have to like grab them and like do a whole thing. And so I think that for me was like, and that was okay. But that game particularly would not have maybe gone well with half of the other group maybe who didn't know each other and who just didn't like vibe with that level of energy. And then I think for me, for example, there'd be something in that if we did play that game, there'd be a dynamic there where I'm sort of holding a little bit more responsibility and how the people who aren't comfortable maybe as to like ensure that that's equal. And so sometimes that's me like tampering down the gym class hero where it's like, you know what, I can maybe like in some ways put you in your place because I can like get you or whatever, tag or whatever, right? If they're just like, doing too much, read the room, right? And so it's like, okay, like I will try and break that monotony, or not monotony, but just that sense of competition.
Yeah.
And then I think too to your question about helping people maneuver is in that cooperation sense is that even like when people are like, oh yeah, like go, or whatever, we're doing like a relay game or whatever. It's like, okay, how do I make this now a little bit more difficult or put a spin on it that doesn't demand that sort of sense of like, uh-oh, like it's my turn. Now I have to like perform. How do I make it more like, playful? Because that's really what's more important. And it's trying to like break that up.
So you have a personal slogan. It is promote justice, edify others, and befriend the lonely. And you initially told me that in our intro call. And I just assumed that was something that developed in the last 1 to 3-ish years. So I was really surprised to find an Instagram post when you posted that exact slogan. And that was May 30th, 2013. So you have been thinking about and working on this slogan for 8, almost 9 years now. Has those 3 segments, any piece of those changed in your mind over that time period, or maybe expanded? How did that come together 9 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like even longer than that, I've had that as like a slogan of mine actually, of just like, this is how I'm like this, like there's things I value. For me, like promote justice is, I think there's a lot of injustices in the world. And so like, how do I promote those types of like, of ways of like this, like by doing this small thing helps to like, at least counteract the system at times, or like what can we do to like do that? And then edify others is like, I love having great conversations with people. I think I know I will leave this conversation feeling edified. Like there's a little bit of a spiritual element to that, but it's just like you feel fulfilled in having good intellectual conversations with folks. And then befriending the lonely is just people like, that's kind of what it sounds like. I think there's can be a lot of lonely people in the world, and I've also felt that as well. And so part of that is like befriending them. Like what can you do to like invite folks in who do feel a sense of loneliness? And so I've always sort of felt like those are important things to me. And then also over the last, however, like since high school, really, is like those are things that have helped guide and shape what I do and how I act. But also, it has helped, and now it's like even part of my work too. Like I get paid to align with my values as much as I possibly can, despite the fact that like labor is a whole other thing. But yeah, so like I definitely am very much. So I'm really glad that I can be able to like do that. And so yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that's So it has evolved for sure. I mean, and how can it not, right? Because there's all kinds of things that are going on. But I think as I get older, it's like has helped kind of ground me for sure.
Definitely seems grounding. And less of, you were just mentioning you get to do that in your work. I'm assuming having that personal slogan and always having that top of mind for you, the work didn't find you. I'm assuming you found the work. Like that work kind of fit into your. I look at the slogan almost as your values, like what you are trying to live towards, or what's the things that are most important to you.
Absolutely, yeah. Like those are important to me, and I think it goes in tandem. Like in the sense of, yes, these are my values, but then also have been able to find work that like helps to cultivate those things. So like, yes, there's Recess, and then I also co-lead a thing called Community Development Learning Initiative. I get to just like build community for folks and facilitate good conversations and host gatherings and just like enjoy. And then we get to work towards things that I think are really important, like anti-racism and social isolation and like city building and getting involved in these things that I think are ultimately about how people feel about the place that they live in.
Was the Snail Project related to that, or was that a Recess project?
A mashup of all kinds of things, but because I also do some stuff around climate justice. So anyway, but the snail shell was this big shell that my friend Son, they made, and I've been trying to get them to find ways to have that shell be seen. And so because of the pandemic, things got pushed back, and so we were like, how about we do this now? Like, how about we like figure it out how to like promote the shell and just like talk about taking a break and more to that, like, you know, snails are slower. We need to pace ourselves. Like, what have we been learning in the last 2 years? Like, have you had actually time to reflect on what's going on? And so that's part of a piece about Recess that I really want to try and get more involved in, and work that I do in other ways is like placemaking. And so I'm calling it playmaking, and like really it's just like creating infrastructure or installations that help people engage in the space that they're in. And specifically what I want to be able to do is not only promote Recess, but also just get people like interacting with like art and that childlike stuff before. Like I would love to have like a big, I don't know, to have like a random like water balloon fight or like a big ball pit where people are participating, and it just sits there, and like having people just like interact with the public in that way would be really kind of cool to like start doing. And so, and in my city particularly, there's a big initiative to be part to like figure out what all of that could look like. And so I'm really excited to sort of see where that goes.
Yeah. I'm so impressed how attuned you are to inclusion. Not even on the racial side, being a Black man, I think that makes sense, and you'd probably be attuned to that. But something I often overlook in terms of inclusion is being an able body. And this experience or this story around this gym space that popped up, that was going to be an awesome potential opportunity for you to host Recess at. you went and checked it out and quickly found out that it wasn't going to be a fit for you because of some accessibility issues. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I had an opportunity to, as you said, to like host recess in a gym space that ultimately was like only accessed by like stairs because of like the way where it was built. Like it's an old building from like the 40s, so like these things weren't in place. But anyway, and so like I get that, like it's not anyone necessarily doing it's the built environment that so many of us have the privilege not to think about. And so I was like, okay, well, I do believe in like inclusivity. Like if by chance someone who couldn't access the program because of the steps, I guess we're just not doing it. Like that's just like hard stop. It's not going to work. And like I didn't get pushback from that, but I was really just like, okay, like these are my values. Like I want to promote justice. So how do I counteract the narrative of just doing things because it's easy? Or and like the reality is, like, I mean, more often than not, someone who had physical barriers probably wouldn't choose to come to recess simply by the fact that they were like, does it make sense for me to like what would that look like? And I'm very much of hey, like if you do, like we will figure it out. Like I like because the goal isn't competition. Like the goal isn't to perform like everybody else. The goal is to just perform the way that you want. And so I guess so for me, it's very much like, hey, like if this is something you want to do, but if you can't get into the door because of steps, like then I guess like that's on me. Like that's my responsibility. And yeah, and I mean, I find that there's a lot of things around inclusion that I'm trying to that I get the opportunity to actually practice a little bit and like sit with that discomfort too. Like, oh, it's uncomfortable. I don't get to do that. Or thinking about like uncomfortable not being able to hold space in that particular location. Or thinking about gender dynamics within my space, or yeah, just like trying to just reevaluate these sort of just common norms and values that we sort of share that we think are like cool, and being like, okay, recess is a place to actually do that. And I think of some of the people who've come to recess very much, I think, would be open and helpful to creating that kind of shift in culture. Like it wouldn't be like a big thing. Or if anything, it'd be appreciated.
Man, you are impressive. Before we wrap up this conversation, love to know. I know you turned 30. How are you handling 30? This is something that we have spoken about a few times over the podcast over the last couple months. And this hill that so many 20 somethings are afraid of, like it's like almost the end of the line for us. So I'd love to speak to a recently turned 30-year-old on, does anything really feel different?
Not really. I mean, I think life just like, I mean, maybe like, yeah, not really. I think if anything, there's a lot of great things about being older, and that's not that being old. It's like being older means I feel like time you had to catch up, or not catch up, but have time to figure out opportunities and things. So like in the work I do, it's like, oh, like this has only happened because I'm older and old enough to get to a place where like, oh, hey, I can start recess. Like a decade ago, that wasn't something that I could have done, and I wasn't even thinking about it. But I settled for like my job that I had or whatever, or even I mean, with time comes with, for some folks, money and things like that. So like help build. And so I think in some ways, like it just sort of builds on top of it, just compounds, right? And I think when we think of like age, I think we think of like physical health and like these sort of things, like, oh, I'm deteriorating. But I mean, some of that can be really, I mean, like you can retroact that by just finding opportunities to be more healthy. And so, but then again, like also like I feel like it depends on how people also see you. So like just the other day, I was at the gym or whatever, and this guy was like talking, and he's like, oh yeah, well when you hit 30, and it's like, yeah, actually, like I am 30. But like, so like part of that is just like, I think also how people see me and thinking maybe I'm a bit younger, and that's totally fine. And so I think there's a little bit of that.
There's a lot of good thoughts in there. Of course, becoming 30, I hear 30s as your 20s, just with more money. And I think you
Totally.
could translate that to just more resources, like more
Totally.
connections,
Yeah.
more money,
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah. More
more.
resources,
Yep.
more connection.
You have a sense of skill set too. Like you've developed some
Yeah.
skills that
Totally.
are useful that you can deploy. And most of all, you have a better sense of identity, both in terms of your value and how you want to contribute to the world as well, which is starting to develop in myself as when as I got older through my 20s. I mean, my early 20s, I was just all over the place. Like
Mhm.
I was thinking my life was going to be dedicated towards this line, and then like a month later, I was like on to something else or over here on this path as
Yeah.
well.
I think that there's something, and I mean, obviously not every narrative is the same. Like I have some friends who are 30 who are still whatever that means to figure it out. And then there's some people who definitely in some ways um have it more figured out, but more because it's just that's just their personalities. But I think one of the things about in your 20s that uh you get to like this like so for me for example I feel actually so to answer your question about the maybe that feeling of being 30 is that there's a little bit of like dread in the sense of like oh I could easily live my life for the next 50 years and it's the same it could be the same. I mean life is never that way but for the most part it feels like there's a little bit more like all right I'm going to go to this I'm going to do that I'm going to live in the city I'm going to do da. And versus I think in my 20s every year I was at a different like I look back at my birthday and I like write down like what happened that year what I'm looking forward to and every year was like same like different like I was never in the same place I was never with the same person I was never da, da, da. And so I was like okay why is that but to your point it's like you're figuring it out and I feel like in at this for me at 30 now, I feel like okay, I'm a bit more. I don't feel like there's going to be these abrupt changes each and every year. But then I say that, and like that's not true either. Like I'm coming up to 31, and I'm going to be in a different house. I have like unfortunately like my dog passed away. Like things like where I think are consistent things in my life aren't going to be there next year. So when I reflect again at 32, I'm like, what is that going to look like? And so I guess it 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 just feels that way because not because of the environment. Like you're still you're more responsive to the changes in like a more consistent way, and versus it being like oh like you're all over the place. I'm not sure if I'm articulating that right, but I feel like there's a little bit more of a sense of like peace about what I'm doing,
Yes.
even though the rest of the world's just all over the place.
Yes. No, I totally know what you mean. And I know you're also going to be the 80-year-old that still has that whimsiness, very like playful, adventurous attitude. Like I just can't, I'm so excited to see you at that age. And like you're still got to be like
Totally.
showing up to recess events, hopefully probably handing it off to somebody else, but like
Yeah,
excited
absolutely.
and participating in what we call life. So
Yeah.
yeah, man. It was Tyson, it's been an absolute blast having you on the show. I
Yeah,
love this
likewise.
topic. It's definitely something near and dear to my heart. I overall have got have taken this sense of combining wellness and play and piecing them together, and also this aspect of sociability as well. Like I think we talked in our first conversation too, there's a time and place that you go hit the gym and you work out hard, but then there's also this place that you can get wellness, fun, and a sense of social, all wrapped up into one. And I feel like that seems so much more at ease with what I'm
Mm.
trying to get with life. So thank you for instilling that value. If people want to check out Recess Calgary, they can go to recesscalgary.ca. If you are in Calgary for some reason, go check out the website and see if Tyson's got an event coming up here. I think it'd be so fun to go. I do actually have a couple Canadian listeners, and we have some mutual friends that are both in Calgary. So
Mm.
maybe they'll check it out after this. But from a broader perspective, if people want to connect, hear what you're doing, where can they go?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm also like, yeah, recesscalgary.ca. I mean, you can like connect with me that way. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, my name, Tyson Bankert, if that's something that we'll want to do. And like, yeah, I mean, I feel like there's, and yeah, that's, I guess, ways to like connect with me. I'm always open to like meeting new people because you never know where it goes. Similarly to like ways in which we meet. And I think that's also been like a huge thing. It's like go out there and like meet people just like be available and be present in spaces. And I know it's been hard lately, but I definitely think like that's where I get momentum as well. So
the opportunity to teach a 16-week class to a group of graduating college seniors on a topic that isn't normally covered in the classroom, what would you teach and how would you teach it?
So this is like I'm gonna like do a whole like like a far
Go for
left
it.
turn here.
I love that.
Because I actually you think like, oh, like he's gonna do something about play or whatever. And I it does not sound like I'm someone who's like already done my taxes. And the deadline's May 31st. So like I'm someone who like that is something that I feel like is like super important. Not taxes per se, but like money management is something that I think is, I know you've talked about it on your podcast before with different folks who, are more experts, I guess, in that. But I think like that would be something I would do, but it would be in a more fun way. It wouldn't be like, here's how to do it. It's like let's like think about like, this is like a huge part of our life. Like, let's think about what this all means and looks like and finding ways to like, I love facilitating. So I would figure out a way to how to like help people not think about like their relationship to money. I'm never surprised by when I've talked a lot more with friends about money in the last couple of years, who are my peers and around the same age group. And I'm always really surprised at each and every one of them who have a very different take, are not thought of certain things, are really into certain things when it comes to their money, that I thought everyone was kind of doing what I was doing. And so I think more conversations about that.
It's probably the most given answer on this podcast, something in the personal finance space. I feel like I am guessing the Canadian education system is just as atrocious as preparing us for the world of personal finance as the US is. Did you take any specific classes on personal finance?
No, like, and it's by design, I think. I don't know why, but it's totally by design. And I think that there's something to be, I've always just been someone who's like, is a saver, and I've always worked. Like I've just always been working. And so like, this isn't a brag or anything, but I think about it like, and it's actually, it frustrates me actually. This has been really, there probably hasn't been, outside of going on vacations and stuff, probably hasn't been a day where I'm not doing like performing some labor. And I feel like that's like, oh, like that's so frustrating. But what it has allowed for me to do is like be in a place where like I cannot feel maybe so oppressed by it. But by that I just mean like, but no one ever told me anything. No one was like, do this, like check out this, like in the banks, like I don't even start it. But like it definitely no, Canada I don't think is any better off. If anything, we are worse in some ways.
Well, lucky for you, I am tackling that topic pretty frequently on this podcast. So hopefully some 20-somethings feel some sense of empowerment and just giving control back, because as much as we hate it, money does play a pretty important factor in the decisions and the flexibility that you have in your life. Totally. So like you, I'd like to spend my time how I would enjoy, and I'd pick and choose how to do that, which is a huge, important driver for me in terms of figuring out my personal finance. So Coach T, folks, super excited. Hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Check them out. That is recesscalgary.ca. Tyson, thanks for coming on the podcast, man.
Thanks, Justin.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you like this conversation today, be sure to subscribe so you'll be notified about new episodes. If you want to connect with me, send me a message on Instagram. I'm at Justin Lee Peters. You can find show notes with links to everything we discussed today at justinpeters.co. This episode was produced by Gabby Dimeke. I'm your host, Justin Peters. Thanks for tuning in.